Welcome. This is Fasken's 16th Annual Global Mining Seminar. My name is Michael Barassa, and I'm with the Global Mining Group here in Toronto. Today's webinar, Ukraine, the epicenter of global change. This is our 11th in the series of 12 seminars this year. For those of you watching online, there's a link to our seminar series beside the video window, and for those of you in the room, the information will be at our registration desk. As you view the slide on the screen, I'd like to provide a land acknowledgement. At Fasken, we have embarked on a journey of reconciliation, guided by our Reconciliation Action Plan. As part of this journey, we believe it is important to acknowledge the land and the people who have called this land home since time immemorial. Today in Toronto, we are gathered on territory that has been the home of many nations, including the Wendat, the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Chippewa, the Mississauga of the Credit First Nations. And Toronto is also covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Chippewa. We appreciate living and working here and recognize the importance of working to advance reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people here and across Canada. Now I'd like to turn things over to Myroslav Chwaluk, my colleague, to introduce today's speakers.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Myroslav Chwaluk. As Michael said, I'm a partner here at Fasken, practicing in corporate finance with a focus on the mining industry. And it's a pleasure to welcome everyone joining us here in offices and online today. I know it doesn't quite look like it, but we've got over 200 registrants today. So thanks for everyone who's attending and who cares about Ukraine. And I'd like to thank Michael, the engine who makes this all work, and all our staff to get this online, to get this seminar going. I want to say we are budgeting some time for question and answers at the end, so please hold your questions for the end. And if your schedule permits, remain after the formal session for discussion with the panelists. I do note, though, it is PDAC and our panelists are very in demand, so we may lose some of them before the question and answer period. So today's seminar is entitled Ukraine, the Epicenter of Global Change. And despite global events ongoing currently, I don't think that's an overstatement of the role that the war against Ukraine currently reflects in the world. And I don't think we can capture the pace of global change very well, given the seismic shifts we see on the world stage unfolding, day by day. Fasken facilitated a panel last spring on which three of our today's guests participated, focusing on the entry into what we call the Ukraine minerals deal, in which the U.S. and Ukraine agreed to a structure where the United States provided financing for Ukraine's development and reconstruction in exchange for leverage for participation in its natural resource sector. And it's since broadened in project scope. But since that time, we've also seen a change in U.S. focus away from Ukraine, including operations in Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and some reduction in funding and support. But possibly at the same time, some indications of Europe waking up to take some of its own responsibility. And all of these developments are going to have an impact on how mining industry participants finance and develop strategies and mechanisms to deal with these shifting alliances, changing security landscape where we see increasing violence as a means of statecraft, and resource nationalism and competition for minerals that are going to power future technologies in defense and elsewhere. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panel. We count ourselves very fortunate to have the panel that we have assembled today, which includes experts in legal matters on Ukraine, international resource project development and relations, and foreign investment, including U.S. government agency investment. So I'd like to start introductions with Danila. Dan Bilak, who's joining us online, we're always proudly note, is a former Fasken lawyer and now managing partner in Kinstellar in Kyiv, who's previously served as a chief investment advisor to the Prime Minister of Ukraine. And we are also proud to note that he currently serves in the Ukrainian military reserves with the territorial defense forces. Welcome, Dan. Also joining us on our panel is John Price, well known on the speaking circuit during PDAC and here at Fasken. John is the managing director of America's Market Intelligence, a premier business intelligence, research, and strategic consultancy focused on Latin America, where he's got a front row seat and powerful voice on global trends shaping policy decisions in major mining jurisdictions. Joining us as well is Jamie Head, who was on our panel last spring, joining us from Hunton, a global law firm where he's a partner with a focus on agency finance, acting for private and public sector actors. And he's also frequently asked to speak and comment around the world. And I think we're very glad to have his perspective from the US. I know just from the sessions you've put on in the last couple of days. I've learned a lot about what's going on in the topics we're going to cover today. And lastly, new to our panel is we're very excited to welcome Matt Simpson, mining and mine development executive, who's chief executive officer of Black Iron since 2010, the only TSX listed company that I know of, and that I think is the only TSX listed company that has a project in Ukraine that allows for direct equity investment in a project in Ukraine. So Matt's experience with Black Iron brings a unique perspective to today's panel, as we actually have an operator's perspective on successes, risks, and possibilities in the mining industry. So thanks again for joining us, guys. We look forward to a great discussion. So we invited our guests here because they're the experts, not me. So I'm going to start with Danilo to give us some framing with an update and a sense of where things stand from a Ukrainian perspective as compared to last May, after one full year of a new administration. And I think it's fair to say what's turned out to be a pretty radically different security posture to Ukraine. We've had a lot of rebuilding conferences since then, and there's still tentative capital waiting on the sidelines. But it's been a pretty bad year for Ukraine. But we have to have hope. So can you take us through what Ukrainians in Kyiv are feeling for the future, and what you think the international community can continue to do to help?
Thanks, Myroslav. And it's great to be here. I can't see the panel, but it's too bad because they're all my friends, and some of whom I haven't seen for a while, Matt in particular. But it's an honor to. Oh, there we go. And you're all looking just great.
We can see you.
I'm really proud to be here and honored to be here again. Wish I could be there with you in person. Where do I start? Situation in Ukraine. How do people feel? People feel cold. They sit in the dark. They have intermittent heat. They have intermittent light. I warned our IT that I may cut out. I didn't put the generator on today because it's outside my window and I might not be able to hear you and you me. So I may have to go and turn it on in a bit. All of this stuff about a peace process and things like that is quite performative. Actually, it's all being done to perform for one man who sits in the White House, and there's no peace for Ukraine that doesn't leave Ukraine in pieces right now. And this war will go on. It'll go on probably for at least another year until Russia feels pain, until the costs of prosecuting the war outweigh the costs of trying to move it forward. And, interesting, we talk about a peace process and everything else. 30% more civilians have died in Ukraine since President Trump took office than before. So the intentions may be good. I'm not going to cast aspersions on those, but we have an awful long way to go. Having said that, nobody is giving up. The latest poll showed that 70% of the people in Ukraine, no matter what we're putting up with, do not want to see any territorial concessions that are not won on the ground. It's an absolute red line drawn in the blood of our soldiers, and who I'd like to recognize, and who are allowing me today to sit here in my relatively warm house to talk with you. To the topic at hand, and I realize I only have a couple minutes, and we'll pick this up. I've said this now for a while, that war is a great accelerator of trends. And one of the trends we've seen is this geopolitical race for critical minerals. This was not something that started during the full-scale invasion, but it certainly has accelerated. It's now become viewed as a must-have strategic asset. And it's not just about putting chips in your iPhone. It's about who's going to win the race for geopolitical dominance, and especially in the defense sector. As Myroslav alluded at the beginning, we now have countries, democratic countries that led the world democracy, willing to use force or threaten to use force against their own allies in order to access these critical minerals. we're sort of seeing the decline or the end of globalization and everything that represented, and sort of a renewed great game, 19th century imperialism, where the world is going to be or some of the leaders want to carve up the world into major blocks and just have the great powers solve everybody's problems, including their own. As Thucydides said, great power, the strong will do what they will, and the weak must suffer what they must. And that's what we're fighting back against. And we've shown that we can do that. We obviously, Ukraine is not just the epicenter of change in terms of innovation and in the defense sector. It is also the center, I think, even still, we can say, in terms of the critical minerals play. That was the first, actually, probably the first reason why we didn't get thrown under the bus a year ago, because we offered the administration something that they actually felt they really needed. And this actually just set off a catalyst of issues that we see even being played out in the Gulf today. The world, I've always maintained, our battle is not against Russia, it's against the four horsemen of the apocalypse: Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. And what is happening and being played out in the Middle East is going to have repercussions across the globe, and certainly it may have an implication of what happens here down the road.
Thanks, Dan. That's devastating perspective in some ways, but eye-opening, and I think it really highlights the need for people to continue to support Ukraine. I'll give it up to the panel here. This might be a good segue into our next planned topic. Was there anyone who wanted to react to maybe what Dan said? Or I think if not, then I think I'll kick it over to John here. I know your wheelhouse is Latin America, but many of the same themes that play out in Latin American mineral resource development are applicable in this Ukraine play with the Reconstruction Fund and the deposits that are available for development. We see a lot of tension playing out in Ukraine, I think, that we see as well in Latin America in terms of shifting alliances and Chinese versus American interests and who's going to develop those deposits. So can you just maybe paint a picture for us on what you're seeing globally in your section of the world, and maybe how Ukraine and European deposits can fit into that picture?
Thank you, and thanks to Fasken for having me back. Dan, great to share a panel with you. Jamie as well, great to meet you, Matt. What a difference a year makes. A year ago, I sat on a panel talking about Trump's approach to mining, and it was all about building tariff walls to protect the mining industry and the processing industry in the United States. And a year later, I sat on the same panel now with Jamie, who educated us all on how the U.S. has developed in very little time two very concrete programs, and he'll be delving into this, I know, in greater detail. But what it showed was a couple of things. First of all, the lightning speed at which a political class in Washington, who probably knows very little about mining, has put together a pretty concrete, well-funded plan. Now, there's issues around execution, but the plan is there. And most importantly, they've abandoned the idea that the U.S. can do this all themselves, and they realize that they need partners, and they've reached out to 53 other countries. And the two countries most likely to take advantage of this are naturally Canada and Australia, or rather the mining companies from those two countries. And I think that's a very positive sign in the sense that the U.S. realizes this is a global industry. The U.S. realizes that the objectives they have, and this really comes down to military supply chains. We talk about critical and strategic minerals, but where they're laser focused on, and with good reason, is rare earths, where China's dominance in terms of processing and refining is 90% up to 100%, depending on the mineral. So we sat through a session here hosted by Fasken yesterday with somebody from the Department of Commerce that sort of laid it out, and it was pretty stark, the message, just how much of an existential threat this supply chain monopoly that China has becomes. What's interesting is how the Canadians have also very quickly put together their own plan, announced 2 days ago. Big number thrown out there, $12 billion. Not yet a lot of details. And I'll let Jamie dissect them, but what will be clear to everyone is that there's still a lot to be clarified. But what, further to Dan's point where, Ukraine in part defended itself vis-a-vis the Americans by pointing to its critical mineral deposits and potential. And, that sort of changed the narrative in that bilateral relationship and I think improved things for Ukraine. The same can be said of Brazil. When it was at loggerheads with the United States over seemingly non-trade issues that suddenly had big tariffs attached to it, they were able to cool the temperature of that dialogue by pointing out to the Americans just how much rare earth deposits they have. Here in PDAC, we've got the Dominican Republic, which is, very new to the mining scene, known for, I believe, zinc and gold, exclaiming that they also have critical minerals. And what's really interesting is how the subject of critical minerals has suddenly turned every politician around the globe into a mining advocate. And isn't that an amazing transformation for mining companies who spend half of their time trying to educate politicians on the worthiness of their sector and on the economic benefits that they can deliver? Now the political class is, the biggest cheerleader. So I see that as a positive. And any country with deposits like Ukraine, it gives them those famous cards that Trump, told Zelensky that he didn't have. It gives them cards to play with. And I think that that's a very interesting thing. Now, as a wake-up call to Canada, Canada's mining industry is still belabored with a totally unnecessary duplicate level of regulations that Ottawa introduced 12 years ago. Over top of a very respected, admired around the world, provincial-led regulatory framework. Most of that federal regulations were completely unnecessary, and all they did was double the length of time it takes to permit a project. So hopefully that's being addressed. But the other thing that needs to be addressed is Canada also has to think beyond itself as just a mineral procurer. The 40% of the world's mining companies are listed in Canada, and they operate as much in Canada as they do outside of Canada. So Canada also needs to come to the same realization as Washington and build into it any programs that it funds, a global approach for Canadian mining companies to pursue critical minerals around the world and process those minerals. Because as the Prime Minister said, if you don't have a seat at the table, then you're on the menu. And so Canadian mining companies need to look at Ukraine. They need to look at other deposits of critical minerals, particularly rare earths, and be aggressive to get a hold of those so that they can have a seat at the table.
I'll just to add on to that. I mean, first of all, I'm very glad to be continuing this conversation. I feel like 10 months ago, I left that panel with some optimism in a very bad situation, a terrible situation, a truly historically tragic situation in Ukraine. But I think we could see on that panel, and I think that's why we've been invited back, because we were right about a few things. Mainly, we saw the potential in this reconstruction relationship, this new approach to a partnership between the United States and Ukraine. And what I didn't know, although I think we suspected, was that was actually just the first, a sort of a snowball even in what has now become an avalanche of a new approach to critical minerals. And what we are seeing is that was maybe one of the first examples of just a radically different approach from the United States and now from the West with regards to critical mineral and metals supplies. We are now seeing direct market shaping actions in a way that before we were relying on tax incentives or tariffs. We're seeing actions such as stockpiling. Right? We're actively talking about building physical stockpiles in the United States. This was just announced with Project Vault. But Canada is talking about its own stockpile. I think we had an interesting discussion over lunch before where Europe, it feels like I have not ever heard someone say there will be a European stockpile, but from our conversation, I suspect there will be, especially if you can prove it worked. So you've got stockpiling, you've got open discussions of larger diplomatic frameworks with a trade bloc. This is a very new idea. If the first bilateral treaty that the United States entered into from a critical minerals perspective was with Ukraine, there have now been dozens. It culminated earlier this month with a meeting of, as you said, more than 54 countries plus the European Commission, where they actively discussed the idea of price floors enforced by tariffs at various stages of production and refining in order to support alternative offtake projects, in order to unlock financing for alternative offtake, alternative to China. And then, of course, you have the other major change in the United States approach, at least, which is direct equity participation in mining companies in a massive scale. These are really big changes, and I think you could see the beginning of them in the just 10 months ago. It's hard to believe how much has happened in 10 months. But when just the first minerals treaty between Ukraine and U.S. So I'm looking forward to unpacking the progress that's been made in the last 10 months in that concrete example, because I think it will probably again be a harbinger of progress in the other projects where the U.S. is following a very similar approach.
Before we move on to Matt, I want to get you in here. I just want to pose a question to Dan, and sorry, this isn't in the outline, but Jamie mentioned, or I think John mentioned, that rare earths specifically are a key component of critical minerals. I mean, there's a big basket of critical minerals. And recently there's been some development in Ukraine as to project selection in the fund. And I know that Kinstellar has sort of created a mining page on your end. And I'm just wondering, there was a lot of talk about rare earths in Ukraine. What is the interest in projects that you're seeing? Is it rare earths? Is it titanium? Is it, was there a specific interest? Is it iron ore, right? So I just want to see what you're feeling on the ground.
Iron ore is always our focus, as Matt will attest. We have lots of it, and we'll continue to mine it. But we have the largest lithium deposits in Europe, graphite, uranium, beryllium. These are all projects to beat. Now, look, there are a couple things. Okay, we need to win a war first. Small matter. Secondly, the gestation period, as John alluded to, of these projects is years, and which is why it's a good thing now that people are starting to talk about them, take them on board, consider them, do feasibility studies. There's been one Ukrainian company is really active in this BGV management. I acted for them in trying to purchase a titanium mine. Just before the full-scale invasion in 2021, that mine was actually privatized during the war. It was sold to Nexol, Azerbaijani concern, and the deals were still being done in the middle of a war. But we have to understand that this is going to require a major stakeholder participation. You've got, the Development Finance Corporation, which that was a real signal, I think, to the market when the U.S. made them the partner in the recovery fund. Former OPIC. I remember when I started at UkraineInvest in 2016. The first thing I did was fly to Washington to try to lobby that President Trump 1.0 didn't close down OPIC. So what they did, they doubled down. So that's good news. But we need war insurance. We're going to have export support. I'm triggering Matt. I can see. I'm triggering all the sore spots. But there has to be very significant sovereign, sub-sovereign DFI support for these projects. one of the key things, and there's knock-ons. It's not like you come in and do a project. Big question right now in Ukraine is where are you going to get the energy from? We have a 4 gigawatt or 3 now gigawatt deficit in terms of our energy supply. Most of our energy, 50% came from nuclear to begin with. We lost early in the war the largest nuclear power plant in Ukraine, and now they're hitting our substations to try to take out the other ones. Yeah. So these are going to have to be very complex. We're looking at probably a $800 trillion reconstruction package as a whole, and critical minerals is going to be a key driver, but it's going to be part and parcel of another key driver, which is the defense sector. Yeah. That is going to be a key driver of our economy for many years to come. And that nexus between the critical minerals sector and as a commercial enterprise and national security and defense is going to affect supply chains all over the world.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. That's a great setup for Matt. We want to get you in here, Matt. Jamie set you up pretty well here, and which is, I think, where I want to take this conversation is direct funding into Ukrainian projects. So you have time if you want to give a quick overview of what Black Iron's doing, and then why don't you tell us on your current experiences with DFC and how you're trying to fund Szymanowska?
Sure. So Black Iron is building a greenfield, which just means a brand new iron ore mine in Ukraine. Twice we've actually pulled together the funding to construct this project, and twice Russia's upset our ability to move the project forward. The first time, and Dan was actually involved with me, we brought in a company called Metinvest, which is the largest iron ore producer in Ukraine, owned by one of the richest, probably the richest person in Ukraine. And we're ready to go. And then Russia came into the eastern part in 2014, put the project on ice. And then in 2017, we phased the build to reduce the amount of capital that would be required up front from about 1.1 billion to 450 million. We brought in some notable investors such as Cargill and some other people I can't disclose, but they're well-known entities. We had all the funding pulled together. We're ready to go, and then we had the full invasion of the country. So it's been a frustrating roller coaster, to say the least. But through that, we've learned a number of different things. Most recently, we brought in Anglo, which a lot of people know. Anglo American is merging with Teck, and that merger will create one of the largest mining companies in the world. And during the war, Anglo did step up and made a commitment to put $4 million US into Black Iron. They have funded an initial $2.4 million of that through a royalty structure. And we did the royalty intentionally because when the war broke out, obviously our market cap took a really serious hit, where people knew at that point that the project would not be able to advance into construction. So we ideally didn't want to issue a large number of shares when the market cap is depressed and create a lot of dilution. We also didn't want to take debt on without knowing when this war is actually going to come to an end. So the royalty was a really eloquent structure where it allowed Anglo to invest. And in exchange for that investment, not only do they have a royalty, which is quite economical for us to buy back, but more importantly, they made a commitment to be part of the future construction funding. So in exchange for a offtake agreement, where they're going to be buying all of our future production at market price, minus some mechanisms that are mutually beneficial, they're also going to fund 15% of our construction cost. So it's really important because this is now a large international investor that has stepped up and said that we want to be part of the rebuilding of Ukraine. We're serious by not just talking, but actually putting real dollars into a company. Beyond that, we're talking to a lot of different multilaterals at this point in time, mostly government-backed entities. We're obviously focusing quite a bit on the United States with the Development Finance Corp having the mandate for the what's much broader than what it was announced a year ago. A year ago is really described as a minerals agreement, and now it's expanded well beyond that. It includes high tech, it includes the energy sector, many different areas of opportunity. But then you also have other multilaterals like the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the International Finance Corporation. There's a number of different entities that are interested in Ukraine, but a lot of them are also hesitant on deploying meaningful capital while there's a war ongoing. And it is somewhat sector specific. You will see funding in things like high tech, where it's a lot more portable in terms of the investment, but things that entail quite a bit of physical asset build is where the concern is, where you don't want to put, in our case, $500 million into an asset that could get hit by a missile. Yes, there is political risk insurance, but even that is somewhat limited in terms of its availability and coverage. Beyond DFC, which, by the way, also provides political risk insurance. A lot of people are aware of some of the equity funding that they're looking to put in the country, but they'll also do debt. They'll do political risk. You have other groups like the World Bank's MEGA arm. They'll provide political risk insurance. So there's a lot of opportunities during this time to raise awareness with these different entities about what are the hard, clear opportunities to invest and position ourselves in this case to be ready such that when there is peace, to be able to move forward very quickly with this project.
Thanks, man. And can you give us a little bit more color on sort of activities that you're pursuing currently, like what avenues you're looking for in the U.S. and who you see as maybe those multilaterals or bilateral direct investments? Is it the U.S.? Is it through the fund? Is it DFC?
Yeah, again, we're looking more broader than just the United States, but to speak to the United States specifically, a lot of people I think are aware of this UDRIP program, which is the DFC's program for equity investments into Ukraine. I believe it's been initially funded with about $150 million, and they're selecting projects. Right now, there's an actual active portal that people can submit their project to. The criteria, though, is a little bit murky. A year ago, it was really, just speaking about the mining sector, applicable for new projects that were authorized by Ukraine's government, and then there would be a requirement that the offtake first rights of refusal would go to the U.S. government. That I'm not sure how strongly it still is in place and how much that criteria has morphed over time, because in our case, it was a pre-existing project that already has been well advanced. So we didn't qualify for the initial U.S. Minerals Agreement Act. And what they also have in place is project assistance. So the DFC, well, you're still doing your engineering studies, you're doing your environmental impact work, you might be doing land purchases that require legal support. You can apply for a $5 million non-recourse loan. And this is $5 million US. It's matched funding. So every dollar that you put in, you have to find a third party that will match that funding. But what's really nice is that you don't need to repay this loan until you actually start construction of your project. And when you start construction of your project, there's also a decent opportunity that DFC will provide you part of the debt funding that you need to build your project outright. And their balance sheet is absolutely massive. So for them to write a multi-$100 million check, even billion-dollar checks, is not inconceivable on the debt side. On the equity side, it's definitely quite a bit more limited. It is available, but much more on a select basis. What I'd say that's different with the DFC under the current administration is the main criteria they focus on is, does it make America stronger? And they have this Venn diagram that's been shown a few times by the people that are responsible for the Ukraine fund, where they basically have three circles, if you remember the kind of Venn diagrams from high school. The first circle is, does it make America stronger? The second one is it something that's important to Ukraine? And then the third one is does it make economic sense? And if you intersect all three of those, that's really what qualifies you to apply.
Yeah, just to pick up on that. So if we go back just the 10 months ago when we started this conversation, we didn't know if DFC would be reauthorized, right? So that was one of the questions that we had to wrestle with. 10 months later, it's been reauthorized in force. It's almost 4 times as large. They've increased their equity ability. They've increased the way that they account for. They've improved the way that they account for equity to allow for more equity investment. There's been their CEO has been approved by the Senate. So Ben Black is on the scene. He has brought with him lots of energy from, I would say, private equity background into DFC. DFC has reoriented itself significantly towards sort of strategic competition with the Chinese. In a way, before it had a large, I would say, agenda that was very similar to the World Bank and other multilaterals that the U.S. participates in. It's still got the development aspect to it, but you've got a lot more national security underpinning what the decisions that DFC makes. As you said, what's good for the United States. we've gone from debating whether OPIC Dan, should be gotten rid of in the first Trump administration to now this new approach to infrastructure finance, which puts a lot of oomph behind owning, lending, credit support into infrastructure that supports U.S. national interest and also the interests of our allies. Just to amplify how much ground has been covered, not only have they been reauthorized, and of course DFC independently does a lot of investment in Ukraine, like very important investment, and it did that during the Biden years, and it's continued to do that during the Trump administration. So it has its own independent amounts of money, $240 billion of maximum exposure, that they will invest into Ukraine. They will continue to invest. In addition, the DFC plays that key role in the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, URIF. Okay, they are one of the limited partners. The other limited partner is the Ukraine State Agency on Support for Public-Private Partnerships. So there are, it's very much a joint U.S.-Ukraine vehicle, with DFC playing that key limited partner role representing the United States. As you said, DFC has, under the original agreement, offtake rights related to minerals, offtake rights that it can exercise itself, something like a right of first refusal on a market basis, also that it can assign to someone. So, it has an ability to shape long-term offtake for minerals. Also, that reconstruction fund, the URIF, this joint vehicle, has investment rights in a host of mineral projects, but also, to your point, broader public-private partnerships. Really, anything with the Ukraine government having some kind of significant role. So either as a licensor or as a concession, or as the public sector entity in a public-private partnership. It's got massive investment rights in that. So if that's just last April and they've invented this new fund, essentially it went live in December. It is fully constituted. It's got $150 million of seed money, $75 million from Ukraine, $75 from DFC. That's intended to grow both by bringing on additional private sector capital, or the capital from partner countries and multilaterals and bilaterals, but also significantly from the license fees, the concession fees for new minerals projects going forward. So it's got a funding source that hopefully will grow over time as projects begin to be financed. It also, of course, if you recall, the United States gets a notional amount of additional equity for amounts that are contributed from a military aid perspective to Ukraine. So this has tied U.S. national interest in some commercial way to continuing to provide military funding. Okay, so that went live in December. To your point, they put the portal open in January. My understanding is they've gotten hundreds of, more than 200 applications. You can go to the portal right now and see it. It's very user friendly. My understanding is they've got a list of maybe 10 or more projects that are in various stages of more advanced discussion. My understanding is 2 of them are proceeding to what they're calling the prospecting panel, which is an initial review after the advisors have looked at it, that would then move into a diligence phase. And there's one project that is even moving into the investment committee phase. They're aiming to have 3 projects reach financial close this year. So that's actually a lot of ground that has been covered. In the background, of course, they've brought on a powerhouse international consultancy, Alvarez and Marsal, to bring their financial diligence abilities as well as their structuring abilities to the project. So they are up and running with advisors on board. Remember, this is a joint project, so Ukraine and the United States. In the background also, the government has been issuing requests for proposals for actual mineral projects in Ukraine, significant projects where they've received bidders, and they've even announced some winners. Presumably, I don't know this for a fact, but presumably these could be on the list of projects that are anticipating getting funding from this reconstruction fund. You would think that they might be. So that's just a lot of ground that has been covered in only 10 months with the reconstruction fund. It's got funds. It's got test case projects. Just to bring it back to where we started with Project Vault and this idea of stockpiles and also the price floors and all of that. We don't know, but it would make sense if some of the projects that could be funded by DFC here could have preferential offtake to the things that are being created by other parts of the U.S. government, by Exim, with regards to purchase to be into this vault. Don't have any inside information on that, but you can see a strategy that is being developed. It's multi-front strategy to realign the basic operating principle for mineral supply in the United States, away from lowest cost to some sort of preferential trade bloc, best friends relationship, where security and access are being prioritized over price. So all of these things that are happening in the news fit together, and indeed it is a well-named panel. It seems like if you really understand what's going on in Ukraine, you probably have a deeper understanding of what's the entire reorientation of the metals and minerals trade around the world.
Thanks, Jamie. You want to jump in, John?
Yeah. I just got two comments that will actually lead to questions for my fellow panelists. One is sitting through the briefing yesterday from individual from Department of Commerce, it was very clear that the driving force of U.S. political action on this is coming from the U.S. Department of War, as it's called now, and their concern over the lack of China's near monopoly of rare earths. I'm not sure exactly, and one of the issues around it was the price floor, and that begs the question: eventually the metals that are refined through programs that are funded by the DFC, will they be able to compete with China outside of the military procurement? So I say that to then speculate that Germany or the EU as a whole, or NATO as a whole, will also be now that Europe is really focused on rearming itself and lowering its absolute dependency on the United States to defend itself, that it will also need to fund a similar program. So I'm curious to hear if you've heard anything along those lines. And I just want to remind everyone that China does not dominate critical mineral mining nearly as much as they dominate critical metal refining and supply. And so all of these programs need to have the end goal of weaning the world off of Chinese absolute monopoly on the refined metals. And along those lines, are the plans being laid out with Ukraine keeping that in mind, or is a investment in smelting or processing inside of Ukraine difficult to plan for right now, given the energy issue and given the security issue? So two questions. Is smelting part of the Ukraine plan? And secondly, is there European plans to also build their own vault or their own stockpile?
I will say that, and again, this is not an inside information. This is what's being reported. That one of the projects that is being reported as going through the investment process is a graphite processing refining operation. I think you're absolutely right that one of the U.S.'s overriding concerns is supporting additional refining outside of China, and it's deploying all of the assets that we've talked about, all of the approaches that we've talked about: direct equity participation, concessional loans, political risk insurance. When we talk about price floors, right, you can do this broad attempt to have a price floor that is agreed in a sort of multilateral basis between various countries, but you can also just have project-specific price flooring by overpaying or providing an offtake to some sort of creditworthy entity. That's part of the potential of these vaults, is that you could create a creditworthy offtaker that could perhaps, for geopolitical strategic reasons, overpay, provide a price floor for refining or for processing or extraction.
Danilo, can I get your thoughts on this from someone on the ground in Ukraine? I mean, we've had a lot of discussions in these panels this week about, the need not just to pull minerals out of the ground and then ship it somewhere else. If we want to be a critical minerals player in Canada, then we need to be able to smelt and produce metals as well. Ukraine has aspirations of providing metals and minerals and access to minerals. Is there opposition in Ukraine the way we know with social communities in, for example, Latin America, that's going to be in opposition to that? Or is that, part of the future that you see? Is there a feeling as to welcoming that kind of investment?
I think we have a few other things to worry about before we get there, whether we're going to have smelters. But I suspect that that is actually going to be, to answer the question directly, all of that upstream added value supply chain development is absolutely on the cards. I mean, Ukraine does not want to become relegated again to being an exporter of raw materials, and this is why. I'm Matt. I'm so happy for you. Honest to God, man. I mean, we've been at this since about 2007, I think, and I think that's a great opportunity, and that you have to do exactly what that plan was, but also to get into that upstream side. You have neighbors with ArcelorMittal and Metinvest on either side, so it's a tough neighborhood. But we are absolutely going to need these things. I mean, look, it's like I said before. Ukraine is going to become the lab for experimentation of everything that is happening in other countries in the world, but everybody's afraid to implement. Whether it's in the energy sector, the infrastructure sector, the critical mineral sector, or in the defense sector, quite frankly. And just given how, understandably dysfunctional, people talk about Europe. Europe has to get its act together. There's no Europe. There are lots of different countries that make up Europe. And we are going to have 2-3 speed different types of relationships. But the point is that Ukraine is 24 out of the 32 critical minerals that Europe as a whole needs to continue developing its defense sector and technology sector and energy sector are found in Ukraine. And I come back to this notion of having a coherent, comprehensive view of what Ukraine's role in Europe is. There is no security in Europe without Ukraine. I mean, from a defense standpoint and even from a resource standpoint. We had, you look at what happened. I don't know if you guys saw the article in the Wall Street Journal last week that was announced about the war games that took place in Estonia last May, where 16 drone operators from Ukraine war gamed against 2 NATO battalions and wiped them out. I mean, there's no way that it's not the battalion's fault. There's no way they know how to fight to prevent that without actually having, God forbid, to go through this. So how do you ensure security in Europe as a whole when the only country that actually knows how to fight your adversary and enemy isn't part of it, right? So it's inevitable. It's inevitable. And we're going to see a reconstruction of that. Right now, what you see in terms of the new European security architecture is, NATO just essentially being a logistics shop until America sorts itself out, if that ever happens. But we've seen over the course since 2014, a group of countries in Northern Europe, led by the UK, frankly, called the JEF countries, the Joint Expeditionary Force countries. These are the Scandinavian countries, Baltics, Netherlands, and the UK. And this has become, Ukraine has become a key part of that emerging alliance. I mean, those 10 countries, even without Germany, are 4.5 times the GDP, size of the GDP of Russia. And with Ukraine, you actually have a country on your eastern shield that is protecting the rest of Europe. And the critical minerals globally obviously play a role in that. But you want to ensure the protection of Ukraine in order to get access to the critical minerals that we have to actually help fund all the defense spending, or the actual implementation of the defense spending that we're talking about. To Jamie's point about the RIF, the Reconstruction Investment Fund, everybody talks about, the United States is ripping off Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. But for the first 10 years, all the profits of that fund go back into reinvesting into the Ukrainian economy, which is actually a phenomenal incentive for Ukraine to get to continue its reforms, to make it an investment-friendly place, so that more investment comes in, we generate more profits, and for the country. And I think the good news is, and I've been in Ukraine 30. This will be 35 years. I mean, it sounds like a sentence, but it's been quite interesting. I've seen everything in '91 from sort of the Soviet cement heads to what we have today. We have super sophisticated people in government who can actually talk to the private equity folks populating DFC now. And, you've got the chief cheerleader as Deputy Minister of Economy, Yehor Perelihin. And, this guy could, I think if he was former McKinsey, if I'm not mistaken. But, you still have in pockets of that sort of old transition Soviet resistance, but it's changed dramatically since 2014. And so that people get it. We're still a work in progress, even the war aside. But as I said, war is a great accelerator, and I'm really hopeful that when we win, we are going to come out of this much stronger, much more focused. We're going to be a very significant regional power, and we are going to be, they're European countries, and not just European countries, are going to be looking to us for how to get things done.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I really like the idea of the competitive advantages that Ukraine can have, and hopefully in mining. And I think this brings me to a question I want to put back to Matt, if we can get back in there. What can Ukraine do better? So we have two partners here. We have the U.S., we're talking about U.S. investment, but we also have the other side of URIF, and we have a Ukrainian government that needs to make things happen. What can the Ukrainian government do to make an operator like Black Iron's project better? Is there something?
Yeah, so how about I'll talk about what are the positives? Why do people want to look at investing in the mining sector? And then what are the things that need to change to help accelerate investment? So the biggest positive that Ukraine has is you have a population that's highly educated, but the wage rates are a fraction of what you'd pay in most other countries. So let's take a skilled electrician or mechanic. Here in Canada, you'd pay that person, when you fully load it with your pension, your health, your dental, about $120,000. And when you typically look at the cost breakdown for a mining company, it's usually very close between the labor rate and how much you spend on energy as your number one and number two costs for operations. And usually labor is number one in Canada. So if you now take that same person in Ukraine, you'd be paying almost a tenth for the same skill level. So that's amazing in terms of where it puts you on the cost curve. The other thing that Ukraine really has going for it is tremendous infrastructure. You've got a great railway network. You have, up until recently, a lot of power availability in the country, and deep sea port access. So those are the real positives. The negatives, and this kind of steps back to earlier how we started the conversation, where, John, you talked about how the Canadian government put the second layer of bureaucracy on in terms of approving projects. One of the big issues that you have in Ukraine is that they still follow Soviet-era documents that are required for permitting. So what I mean by that is if you're an international company, you typically need to do your technical studies to what's called National Instrument 43-101. It's just a standard that says all the work needs to be done by people that are qualified, that are independent of your company to certify that the results are reasonable and fair. And investors rely on that document, both debt and equity. And when you do environmental work, especially if you want to go to a multilateral or you want to go to an export credit agency, you need to follow what's called the Equator Principles, which were developed by the World Bank. And this is, again, a set of standards for environmental practices, social practices that are deemed to be the best in the world. So you need to do all that work for an international investment, but in Ukraine, you need to duplicate that work. So you need to do a Ukraine version of a feasibility study. It's called a PROEC. And you also need to do Ukraine versions of the environmental impact studies. So not only is this a duplication of time, a duplication of cost, but the even bigger issue is trying to find qualified resources in Ukraine that can even perform, especially the technical studies in the first place. It is really difficult to even find sufficient engineers that work for what's called a design institute or an engineering company to conduct those studies that are needed. So that is a massive bottleneck. And one of the recommendations that I've been repeatedly saying over the past couple of years is Ukraine needs to adapt international standards. There's no reason why you should duplicate this work. It doesn't add any value. So adopt, whether it's NI 43-101, whether it's the JORC standard, the SK 1300 in the US, I don't care. They're all very similar, but adopt one of those international standards. And similarly, on the environmental side, in fairness, Ukraine is moving in this direction, but adopt the Equator Principles. And by avoiding that duplication of work, it's going to speed up investment because it's going to speed up the ability for people to get projects implemented.
Can I just ask, this is a question, we have standards for qualified persons under NI 43-101, and you're saying it's different standards under PROEC. So is that part of the difficulty finding people who are qualified under PROEC, or just in general in Ukraine?
Well, it is, again, people that actually work for a company that can provide the technical knowledge to complete that study is a big, and it was a big issue, by the way, before the war. So now with the war, with the number of people that have been lost, people are recruited into the military, it's exceptionally difficult to get that kind of work done. Sure, once the war ends, people are going to return back to normal life, but you still have this fundamental issue that you just never had enough people with the skill level in the country to begin with. So now you're going to layer on this excitement of new investors wanting to come into the country. If it was a bottleneck before, it's going to be a choke point moving ahead.
Can I just pop in for 1 second, Myroslav?
Of course.
Because this is a really important point. I mean, I was an advisor to Prime Minister Groisman on foreign investment for 3 years, and we got rid of thousands of regulations that obviously we hadn't gotten quite far enough. But the landscape has changed dramatically. I mean, Matt will remember the fun we had with the Ministry of Ecology and getting research, getting environmental assessments and stuff redone, and a lot of that kind of nonsense has changed. And you can't get away with it anymore. There's an important issue here about being careful of what you wish for, because I would hate to have the PROEC replaced by EU regulations which is really what's on the dance card right now as we move forward towards accession to the European Union. And my hope is that I know this is going to sound crazy, but my hope is that the guardrails and the direction, the guidance on this is going to come from the Americans and the influence that the DFC is going to, and the administration can have through their involvement through the URIF. And because God forbid that you have all of the mining and every other regulations. I'm not an expert on it. But I know enough that it scares me. And, adopting, I think Matt's right, adopting sensible international regulations in the context they now have, and reforms, having participated in this for many, many years, reforms in Ukraine generally take place and are driven against specific KPIs or benchmarks, a specific project that you're going towards. If it's legal reform, it was accession to the Council of Europe. If it's regulations, it was all the responsibilities and obligations we had under the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, which, frankly, half of people don't know this. They think we're just starting negotiations now to get into the EU. Over half of the acquis communautaire, which is the document you signed to get in, has already been closed as a result of the reforms that took place in Ukraine between 2016 and 2022, or even today. It's still ongoing. So Matt's point is a really important one, that we got to get out of some of the Soviet era regulations, but we have to also make sure that we're able to moderate some of the excessive EU regulation. And I think that this is where URIF can actually play a major role, because even though they have this agency that's the partner, it's really the Ministry of Economy that is to this, and that is the key driver to making changes to the regulatory landscape in Ukraine.
John, I want to get back to you. Have you had experience in Latin America with either Canadian-driven or U.S.-driven reforms that had a positive impact on Latin American mining jurisdictions that might be able to be reproduced in Ukraine, or any advice for exporting that kind of knowledge, or changes within governments that unlocked a sector that might be reproducible in Ukraine?
Well, this morning here in this room, we had a session with lawyers from 8 countries in Latin America, and I would say 2/3 of them talked about different types of streamlining that are going on. Argentina is a country where it's, by and large, 3/4 of the regulation is driven by provinces, but the federal government has, again, in its wisdom, came down in previous governments with duplicative regulations, and regulations that out and out conflicted with the tone and direction and limits of provincial regulations. This new government, the Milei government, is pulling back those. There's a recognition that the provinces know how to regulate themselves. They've been doing it for 100 years, and they don't need Buenos Aires full of lawyers, no offense, who know nothing about mining, making rules for miners. And you're seeing in Chile, a country that used to be the darling of the world for everything from exploration to development to operations, to becoming a country where there was almost no pipeline of exploration because the hurdle cost of developing mines in Chile was so expensive because of the litigation and regulations and non-elected bodies who were essentially opposing mines and using their sort of moral blackmail to stop projects. You're seeing a government that is dedicated to bringing all that back. So there is and Ukraine and any other jurisdiction that wants to compete in mining has to be aware that the tide has shifted around the world from more and more regulation to now more and more deregulation. Canada needs to catch up. The Americans are catching up. The Americans are even worse off than the Canadians, but I think they're, at least out of Washington, they're really making headway. But, all across Latin America, there is a movement to simplify, speed up things. And again, this is all about the geopolitical importance of mining and the wake-up call. Mining was bottom of the list for priorities for so many politicians around the world, and now it's right at the top. And I think when that happens, you see movement. And this is where, the Europeans, Dan's absolutely right, goodness forbid that Ukraine adopts regulations that the EU used to, because that is a jurisdiction that has all but crushed the mining industry over the last 50 years. And so they are not a model to adopt in terms of how to regulate your mining industry. So hopefully, clearer heads will prevail. Even the Europeans will say, yeah, if we want critical mining to work in Ukraine, we don't want to burden these guys with our regulations.
Matt, I want to give you hello. I want to give you a chance to respond if you have anything. I know you have a hard stop. So anything there that you want to, or closing remarks you want to get in there?
Yeah, I'll make a few comments I think are maybe pertinent that we haven't touched on. We've talked a lot about funding out of the United States, and reasonably so, because in fairness, the U.S. government has been probably the leader in actually not just talking, but putting serious money behind construction of critical minerals projects. And we're now seeing here in Canada also a similar behavior where our government is actually stepping up to fund. And we haven't really seen that in most of the rest of the world yet. It's a lot of talk, goodwill, but not real action. What you are also seeing is that some of the Scandic export credit agencies, and specifically the Danish one, I think it's EIFO, has been very active in funding people and projects in Ukraine during the war. So they're one of the only multilaterals that actually has made significant investments, well over 200 million during the ongoing war in the country. Others like Finvera, similarly, their government has basically told them that recovery of Ukraine is going to be absolutely paramount in looking at the selection of projects. So we do have other agencies that are looking to step up and put money into the country, which I think is absolutely critical. One of the big challenges, though, is going to be electricity, as Dan's already mentioned, looking about can he stay on this call? Does he need to fire his generator up? Well, the other reality is that electricity prices in Ukraine prior to the war were about 8 cents per kilowatt hour. So that's a little bit lower than what you would have here in Canada, or in Ontario, I should say, for electricity rates, more than what you would pay, say, in Quebec. But by on par, it's a pretty competitive rate. Since the war, the commercial electricity prices have now risen to 22 cents. So it's almost a tripling. And think about that comment I made earlier, that usually it's labor followed by electricity. In Ukraine, it's energy followed by a number of other things before you hit labor. So when energy prices almost triple, it really brings a lot of the mining industry to its knees. And we're really just seeing that in the last couple of weeks. We recently just saw Fair Expo, a big iron ore producer, actually idle its operations. Are now facing a lawsuit, but they idled. Metinvest has been shutting down some of their iron ore mines, and all these operations were operating right up until a couple of months from now. So the electricity price and availability is really starting to cripple the industry. And when you talk about secondary processing, most countries now are really pushing in that regard, because they want to keep as much of the value in terms of the labor that's created, the tax benefits within the country itself. But for Ukraine to be able to establish that, one of the precursors coming out of this war is going to be getting the electricity generation capacity reestablished as soon as possible, because it will be also a key enabler for further investment, regardless of the sector.
Thanks,
I think that's an absolutely crucial point. If I could just jump in on that, I think the way we'll deal with it is fire up our nuclear power plants. And now that we have the electricity bridge into the EU, 43% of our electricity today is coming from the EU, and so I think that once we get to a more stable position, especially if we can close the skies even before the end of the cessations, we'll get a good chunk of that back. But the mix that we're going to have going forward is going to be very different. We're not going to be building big thermal power, hydropower, nuclear power plants anymore, for obvious reasons, painting big bullseyes on the roofs. I think what you're going to see is SMRs. That's going to be a thing. Small modular reactors, 200 to 300 megawatts, enough to power a city. And you're going to see a decentralized grid, where a very big emphasis already in this budget on cogeneration. We've seen it already in Kyiv. It was a thing in the agro sector when waste to energy type of thing. But that cogeneration is I have this effect on Matt. He always walks out. But take care, buddy. So I think that you're going to see a very, very different energy market in Ukraine that is going to become a model for energy market in Europe.
Awesome. Matt had a pre-commitment, so we do have to go. Jamie, is there anything on the U.S. side, on the agency side, that they're specifically concerned about looking out for that maybe we can start thinking about as Canadians potentially investing in? Like, anything keeping DFC up at night, or in Ukraine specifically? But
yeah, no. Well, I think one of the challenges for Ukraine has been to mobilizing capital, and it has made great bounds and improvement in this, but is around a perception of corruption and a lack of investor confidence, including bilateral lender confidence that the money will not be misused. And I think what you will see as a benefit of its continued partnership with the EU, one of the multilaterals we haven't talked about is the EBRD, European Bank for Reconstruction Development, a long-standing tight relationship for the better with Ukraine. An example, they're funding some of the digitization of the Soviet-era mining records to make them available to the public. That's a very important project. They are, of course, a bondholder for Ukrenergo and for the people trying to address the very problem that we've been talking about, which is the price of electricity and keeping the lights on. But I would say that the relationship with the EU, with multilaterals, with DFC, with EXIM, has a major part of the condition of their continued partnership has been continued move away from, just to use your word, like a Soviet approach, which doesn't have a lot of market confidence in transparency or accountability or independence, towards more and more alignment with those IFC sort of equator principles for governance and for accountability that can give the kind of confidence to unlock more foreign investment. So I don't know, I'm not speaking for DFC, but I will say all of the multilateral and bilaterals have, a condition of their engagement has been more transparency, more accountability, more alignment with sort of corporate governance standards that Canadians would recognize.
Yeah, and I think it's a net positive for Ukraine. Anything else the panel wants to get out before we close? I think we're running up against a good time to move into questions. No? Chance for the audience to pose questions to our experts.
Yeah, I don't know if Dan or Jamie are able to answer this one, but I guess what always puzzles me is that the U.S. or even Europe are prepared to put some money into the Ukraine. There's going to be assets there that they have funded, and the Russians are likely going to be bombing some of these assets. What protection, like in this whole process, is there for funding these assets and to avoid the Russians destroying them?
Well, one thing that was mentioned that it's hard to overstate the importance of this is the availability of insurance in Ukraine. And one of the projects that I've worked on that many people who are backing multilateral or bilateral development banks has been to keep the insurance market, particularly for war insurance and damage that comes from the Russian assault, to keep that market functioning. So a reinsurance of Ukrainian insurance products. Okay, that doesn't stop people from blowing up the assets, right? And the reason that we've tripled the price of electricity is because there's targeted action to remove substations and to take other power plants offline. So not to steal your answer, but you've got to win the war first, right?
That's my opening line in every single reconstruction conference I go to. The Ukrainian government has actually come up with some insurance that it provides, mostly to Ukrainian companies. I know that Lloyd's has placed war risk insurance in certain sectors. I think it's sector specific and region specific. But Michael, it's the guy in the Kremlin you got to talk to. At the end of the day, as I said, none of these big projects are going to get underway until there's a cessation of hostilities, and frankly, they're not going to be ready anytime soon. I mean, it's great that we get to financial close this year on a couple projects. I agree, that's like warp speed, especially for Ukraine. That's warp speed, but I think it's warp speed anywhere. We've seen a really good uptake. I think that it's, we've seen there are 8 projects worth $2.1 billion right now that are going through the system. I think that there is I think there is a play. I think that it depends on the risk appetite. Canadians are notoriously risk adverse. And you just have to have deal with the export development corporation. I don't know, maybe it's changed, but they never saw a risky environment they didn't want to avoid. That's a killer. DFC actually has gone so far now as to de-risk the investment of any company in Ukraine, whether it's American or not, which is really quite, given America first, is really quite an interesting concept. But it makes sense because because of this this project, as Jamie pointed out, that it is in America's interest that people come in and invest, and they're prepared to underwrite it. And I think that you're going to see more of that. The herd is always there. You've got. I mean, John, how many major players are there in the world that would have an appetite for this, other than Matt? 5, 6. And those will be the guys. They'll club together. They'll come in and when the deposits open. But the thing is to get into those deposits. And a lot of those deposits, when I was in the Prime Minister's office, I mean, it was a battle every single day to keep the oligarchs' clutches off those deposits so that they could be opened up for foreign private sector investment. And that battle more or less we won. In fact, the government is now clawing the ones we didn't win back because they realize that that's not sustainable. They can't use it or lose it type of thing. And that's all to the good. And everybody will see that. They'll do their DD, and we'll get there eventually.
I think Mike's got one more. Am I right?
Just a follow-up really to that. And I guess where I was sort of hoping, or where this might go to, and I don't think Jamie or Dan, you can even answer this question, but the more and more that money is being invested through these agencies by the United States to the Ukraine, isn't that a reason like Mr. Trump would actually look to try to settle this thing? Because your country's investing in the Ukraine, and yet it's being destroyed by Mr. Putin, as Dan has mentioned. Is there any hope of that at all?
You have to ask him.
I think that's where it was going. But anyway, I'm just making the comment.
Hard to get into that mind, Michael.
It's really hard to be an American come to Canada. But I think that's the right answer.
For your own personal safety, Jamie, I would just avoid any discussion of hockey.
I will say that it's clear that the reconstruction fund and the approach that has been taken in the last 10 months have shown it's really just one example, but it has shown in a very concrete way how much United States' national security is tied to the success and safety of the Ukrainian people. And I think it is in some ways has been a gift to have it so concrete and obvious and quantifiable.
I would agree with that 100%. I can't even count the number of times I thought we were going to get thrown under the bus, and we're still in the game. And we still get critical intel for our frontline troops. We're still able to purchase American goods. I agree. I think there is a broader game here. That aside from what's being played out, gamed out in the White House, very smart people in DFC, in the Commerce Department, and across American government that we see here. Meet some really interesting people in Kyiv in the restaurants. You wonder what the hell are you doing here? But anyway, and not all from 3-letter agencies. So I would agree with that, Jamie.
I don't see any. Oh, one more. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. I guess my question was more long-term. So even if the current risks are placated, we have a really real and long-term geopolitical risk of where Ukraine is at right now and probably will be. So even if we see increased investment, do you think the current risks are essentially going to be placated, or do you think it's a possibility of ensuring another thin layer of security or deterrence in the region?
If I can answer that, I don't think our geopolitical risk down the road is any different than the rest of Europe. We are now one very vulnerable continent, and anybody who thinks that this is still anybody who still thinks that this is a Russia-Ukraine war is got their head in the sand. I mean, every day you've got cyber attacks, you've got anchors dragging cables up from seabeds. You're going to see more terrorist and sabotage operations in the EU as Russia tries to destabilize Europe, and that'll include all your extractive and manufacturing industries. Yeah, we're on the front line, but that means is that our allies need to double down and support us, and really we need. Let me be perfectly blunt. There is no security in Europe without defeat of the Russian army in Ukraine. And that is doable. That is still doable today. This narrative about that we can't win this war, or that the inevitability of Russia winning the war, that's absolutely not true. Russia is in very, very, very dire straits. I don't know that, I think that if this war goes on and we maintain even the level of support that we get now, Russia is going to be in very, very different place by the end of the year. And so I think that those risks are there, but they are risks that are now being spread throughout the continent. And anybody making an investment in Europe and as a whole has to take those into consideration.
It's no surprise that the support for Ukraine and the support for their governments to continue contributing money and weapons support to Ukraine is strongest in Eastern Europe, because they're the ones who grew up. The political class today in power in Eastern Europe grew up still remembering the Soviet times, and they understand this existential threat. In places like Germany, where my wife's from, Dan's right. Every month you hear of something. Now, they don't always immediately connect it to Russian sabotage or Russian involvement, but eventually, once they investigate it, they realize it is. And whether that's the airports being hacked.
Well, Berlin went dark.
That's right. Whether it's the power systems being hacked. And you know, it amazes me. I mean, it amazes me that the United States, after spending trillions in a Cold War, now can spend pennies on the dollar because Ukraine's willing to do the fighting for them, and they've stopped funding. After spending trillions to try to denigrate the Russian military power, Ukraine's done more along those lines for far less money and far less American blood than 50 years of Cold War, and yet they just stopped funding. I don't get it. I also don't understand why the Europeans don't get more aggressive and dig deeper into their pockets along this issue, because Ukraine people have demonstrated that in spite of all the negative press around governance in their country, they are still supportive of their leadership, and they are not willing to give up any territory. And the rest of the world needs to back them up on that. And frankly, you know, Canada, thankfully, is one of the few countries that has continued across different governments to support Ukraine. I wish we could say the same of all the countries in Western Europe and the United States.
Last chance. Anyone else? One more.
Yes, thank you so much. I really like this panel, and I really like all the participants. Thank you so much. And we know that Ukraine is in the path to join European Union, so we signed the European Association Agreement. And do you think that the clause regarding the most favored nation clause, which allows U.S. entities to participate to have preferential purchase rights, can conflict with European Union regulations in terms of non-discrimination and open competition purchase, in your opinion?
I've had so many of the best ideas and projects I've worked on been undermined and ruined by the European competition rules that I have like personal reaction to the idea that it could undermine the program. I don't have a great answer for you from a technical perspective as to the legality in terms of the larger rules out of Brussels, but the preferential rights, right? The way that they work there's something like a right of first refusal for DFC and for DFC's assigned entities. These types of treaty opportunities, these types of preferential treatment and best friend relationships, I think actually are going to be the trend in minerals in a global setting. So to me, the ministerial that was just in Washington, if we're talking about, by the way, the European Commission was there, right? If we're talking about a large plurilateral trading system, then whatever the EU thinks about it now is going to have to change, because we're headed in this direction of a preferential best friends relationship that is designed to challenge China's stranglehold on processing metals. Yes, I'm not sure whether it works now or not, but the trend is moving in the direction of this sort of solution. So I would expect that Brussels, again, the European Commission's on board with this. The UK is a big champion of what was happening at the ministerial. I'd expect that the regulations will have to catch up with this new approach. That would be my guess.
One of the key things that was discussed, key considerations when the URIF was put together, was in fact whether this was going to impact or impede Ukraine's succession to the EU. And so what the workaround was to allow European countries equal access. So the Americans were very, very beneficent, so they're going to make even more money as a shareholder. But for the European Union, it was actually it was a big concern of theirs that their companies be allowed to have access to these projects, and they can. So I don't see that as a problem at all.
All right, let's leave it there. I want to leave it with a note of hope. I think that there's a nice synergy that, 10 months ago we were talking about a session in May, and we really didn't know where this minerals deal was going to go. There was a lot of consternation, and I think it's turned into something that's positive for Ukraine and positive for the U.S. and positive for our industry. So that brings our program to a close. I will finish by promoting our next session, which is our final hybrid session today in our office at 3:30. It's called Project Blue Critical Materials Forum 2026, which is a great segue from our session today. You can sign up for those by visiting the events section of Fasken.com or by the registration desk outside. And on behalf of Fasken, I would really like to give a massive thank you. We can't thank you guys enough. Daniel, massive effort to join from Kyiv. You really make the panel to give that perspective. Jamie, incredible view. I think you broke some news. I don't think you did, but I think you did. John, incredible insights and sharing that we really appreciate. So, and of course, Matt, who couldn't stay, but big thanks to everyone in a really busy conference schedule. Thanks to the audience. We had some great questions and participation, and thank you for your interest in Ukraine. I hope that everyone walks away with a better picture of Ukraine's role in the future of mining and security and continues to pay attention to and supports Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Слава Україні. Thanks, guys.